Alex Radcliffe built an empire worth £26 million, and Emma Lawson was just a junior accountant with a keen eye. Neither of them knew that a single mismatched serial number on a laptop would bring the entire operation crashing down and expose a decade of lies to the world. For years, Alex Radcliffe appeared to be the epitome of success. From the outside, he was a visionary entrepreneur, a man who had seemingly transformed London's luxury lifestyle market with his tech startup. His life was a highlight reel of boardroom victories, lavish parties, and international travel. Investors were captivated by his charisma. Journalists praised his innovation, and his social media accounts showcased the trappings of immense wealth. Designer watches, sleek cars, and invitations to exclusive events. Everywhere Alex went, it seemed he carried a personal aura of accomplishment. To the public, he was untouchable, a self-made mogul whose ideas had reshaped an entire industry. Inside the offices of his company, the story looked just as polished. Floors gleamed under state-of-the-art lighting. Conference rooms boasted smart glass that adjusted to the sunlight, and the walls were lined with awards and framed press clippings. Employees were encouraged to dress sharply, and every meeting was orchestrated with the precision of a high-budget film production. There was a sense that anything Alex touched turned to gold. Even clients who had never seen a product in person seemed impressed by the aura of professionalism. But beneath this shining surface, the reality was entirely different. The company's success was largely imaginary, an elaborate illusion built on forged documents, fake contracts, and manipulated numbers. There were no real profits, no substantial product deliveries, and no verifiable clients to speak of. Millions of pounds had been funneled into offshore accounts, hidden behind layers of shell companies, and transactions designed to confuse anyone who might try to follow the money. For years, Alex's empire relied entirely on appearances, relying on the assumption that no one would look too closely at the details. Alex himself was a master at deception. He had a talent for reading people, knowing exactly how to inspire confidence and trust. He could make investors feel like they were part of something revolutionary, convincing them that their money was being put to work building a groundbreaking product line. Employees were motivated by the promise of growth and innovation, unaware that their labor was supporting a house of cards. Every press release, every glossy promotional video, and every carefully staged product launch was designed to maintain the illusion. In many ways, Alex's genius was not in technology or business innovation, but in his ability to manipulate perception. Despite the outward perfection, small cracks had begun to appear. Vendors sometimes reported missing payments. Auditors noted irregularities in documentation, and employees quietly whispered about inconsistencies they had observed. These warning signs were always easy for Alex to dismiss, brushed aside with charm or plausible explanations. To him, no flaw could ever be significant enough to threaten the carefully curated image of success. He was careful, meticulous, and always one step ahead of anyone trying to uncover the truth. Yet the cracks were growing. Even the most convincing illusions can falter when reality refuses to cooperate. The longer the empire operated without genuine substance, the more precarious it became. Every transaction, every investor presentation, and every shipment of supposed products was a gamble. The empire was built not on innovation or value but on deception, and deception by its nature is fragile. Alex had created a system that depended on constant attention and control, leaving little room for error. One misstep could bring everything crashing down, though he had no way of knowing when or how that moment might arrive. Despite this tension, the public remained oblivious. To them, Alex Radcliffe was a hero of modern business, a symbol of ambition and ingenuity. Invitations to high-profile events poured in, and the press continued to document his success with admiration rather than scrutiny. The company's apparent growth and profitability convinced people to ignore small inconsistencies and focus on the larger narrative of triumph. It was a perfect illusion, one that had been carefully maintained for years and one that seemed, at least on the surface, unbreakable. But perfection, no matter how well constructed, is always vulnerable to the smallest miscalculation. A single overlooked detail, a tiny human error, can unravel even the most elaborate of schemes. In Alex Radcliffe's case, that moment would arrive not through sophisticated forensic investigation or an insider whistleblower, but through a small, seemingly trivial mistake, one that would ultimately expose the $26 million empire he had spent years building. A misstep so minor that at the time, it seemed completely inconsequential, yet it held the power to destroy everything. What no one could have anticipated was that this tiny error, unnoticed by everyone except the most diligent observer, would become the first real crack in a facade that had fooled the world. The perfect illusion, meticulously crafted and meticulously maintained, was about to collapse. The stage was set for a dramatic unraveling, and the world would soon discover that Alex Radcliffe's glittering empire was built entirely on deception. One silly mistake was all it would take to change everything. The mistake began in the most ordinary way, in the most ordinary of tasks. It wasn't a dramatic blunder, no sudden explosion of chaos or high-stakes confrontation. It was a routine shipment, just another delivery of high-end laptops meant for the company's flagship project. For Alex Radcliffe, these shipments were part of the daily illusion, pieces of a puzzle designed to reinforce the image of a thriving business. They weren't real products in the sense that anyone outside the company could verify. They were props, carefully labeled and meticulously documented to satisfy investors and auditors. The junior accountant, Emma Lawson, had been with the company for only a few months. She was diligent, detail-oriented, and quietly observant. Her role was minor, invisible even, yet crucial in the larger machinery of the company. She was tasked with checking the incoming shipment against the inventory list and recording serial numbers. To most people, this was nothing more than a mundane job. To the empire Alex had built, it was the first weak link. As Emma worked through the paperwork, she noticed something odd. One of the laptop boxes had a serial number that didn't match the inventory sheet. At first she thought it was a simple typographical error. The numbers were almost identical, with only a single digit out of place. It seemed trivial, hardly worth reporting. But curiosity compelled her to double-check. She entered the serial numbers into the manufacturer's online database to verify authenticity. The result was immediate and alarming. The database had no record of the laptops at all. They didn't exist. The alert popped up like a small blinking warning in an otherwise routine day. Emma's heart sank, but she remained calm. She knew that reporting discrepancies was part of her job, even if the implication was huge. She made a note and brought it to her supervisor, expecting the usual dismissal or correction of minor clerical mistakes. The supervisor glanced at the entry, frowned, and suggested it might be a mislabeling error or a delayed update in the manufacturer's system. Still, the red flags had been raised. The discrepancy, while small, was now on record. And in the world Alex had built, any record of inconsistencies was dangerous. That single mismatch set in motion a chain of events that no one could have predicted. A domino that would eventually topple the carefully constructed facade. Over the next few days, the accountants began cross-referencing every serial number from the past several shipments. The initial discovery revealed something shocking. Multiple shipments contained products that didn't exist in any manufacturer database. Each delivery had been faked to match invoices and contracts. These weren't simple clerical errors. They were deliberate fabrications, small lies embedded within a larger, complex web of deception. Every false shipment had been used to justify millions in investor funding, millions that had never been backed by real products. Alex sensed the danger almost immediately. He had built his empire to appear flawless, and the discovery of non-consistent products threatened to unravel everything. He tried to contain the situation quietly, instructing staff to double-check the documentation and create plausible explanations. But Emma and the other employees had already begun to connect dots. The small, seemingly insignificant mistake had awakened a suspicion that could no longer be ignored. Auditors were brought in under the pretense of routine verification. What had seemed like minor paperwork errors now appeared systemic. The fake shipments, the forged invoices, and the non-existent clients were no longer invisible. Emma's single, careful observation had given investigators the first real lead, the only concrete evidence needed to pierce through the layers of deception. The irony was stark. Years of meticulous planning, sophisticated financial maneuvering, and careful public appearances had been undone not by a technological breakthrough, a courageous whistleblower, or an elaborate sting operation, but by a single human error noticed by a conscientious junior accountant. A mistake so ordinary that most people would have overlooked it entirely became the key to exposing a $26 million. By the time the auditors realized the magnitude of the problem, the dominoes were already falling. Emails, contracts, and financial statements were scrutinized under a microscope. Each document revealed inconsistencies. Each transaction exposed manipulation. The empire that had seemed untouchable was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own lies. In a way, the mistake was poetic. Alex had built a perfect illusion for years, carefully constructing every detail to appear legitimate. Yet, in the end, it wasn't a sophisticated flaw or an ambitious rival that revealed the truth. It was a simple human oversight, an ordinary mistake that became extraordinary because of what it uncovered. The smallest crack in the surface had turned into a widening cave of the money moved through trusted associates, offshore entities, and business intermediaries. Alex was rarely directly implicated on paper, which had allowed him to maintain the image of a legitimate entrepreneur. For years, he had succeeded in presenting a facade so convincing that even auditors and regulators had failed to see through it. But no system is perfect, and no deception is infallible. The investigators noticed that every complex system relies on human operators, and humans make mistakes. Alex's meticulous planning had one weak point, the assumption that all employees and accountants would follow his scripts flawlessly. Emma's tiny observation had exposed the first tangible flaw, and from there, the investigators began linking the pieces like detectives, assembling a jigsaw puzzle. Each revelation connected to another, and the picture that emerged was astonishing. Millions of pounds had been siphoned from investors and funneled into luxurious personal expenses and investments unrelated to the company. Properties in London, holiday homes abroad, and high-end vehicles were purchased under the names of shell companies, keeping them legally separate from Alex, but clearly funded by the fraudulent empire. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. 26 millions had been manipulated, shifted, and hidden, all without ever producing a legitimate product or service. By the time the investigators completed their initial round of tracing, it was clear that the empire was a house of cards. The tiniest disturbance, the discovery of fake laptops, had triggered an avalanche of accountability. Alex's complex network of lies, which had taken years to construct, was beginning to collapse under the weight of evidence. Every layer of financial trickery, every forged contract, every offshore transaction, was now visible and vulnerable. The irony was striking. Alex had believed himself untouchable, meticulous in his planning, and immune to oversight. Yet all it had taken was one human error, one minor oversight, to expose the skeletons hidden beneath the glittering surface of success. In that moment, it became clear that the empire was not invincible. One small crack had grown into a fracture that threatened to destroy everything Alex had built. The stage was set for the inevitable fall, and the investigators were finally closing in on the truth, armed with the evidence needed to dismantle a £26 million illusion that had fooled everyone for years. Once the investigation gained momentum, Alex Radcliffe's carefully constructed world began to crumble at a frightening speed. What had seemed like small discrepancies in paperwork and shipping records became an avalanche of evidence that no charm, no explanation, and no legal maneuver could withstand. Bank accounts were frozen, corporate properties were placed under investigation, and employees were summoned for questioning, each interview revealing more layers of deceit. The empire that had once appeared untouchable was exposed as a fragile illusion, held together by nothing more than manipulation and lie. The media wasted no time seizing on the story. Headlines screamed of fraud and deception. painting Alex as a master con artist rather than a successful entrepreneur. Tech mogul or criminal genius, one newspaper asked, while another declared, 26 million empire built on lies. Public fascination grew by the hour. Investors who had once praised Alex for his foresight now demanded answers, realizing that millions of pounds had been invested in a company that existed largely on paper. The scrutiny was relentless, and Alex found that the adoration he had relied upon for years had vanished overnight. Investigators meticulously catalogued the evidence, and the extent of the fraud became undeniable. Contracts that had been presented to investors as proof of business relationships were revealed to be entirely fabricated. Signatures were forged. Companies listed as clients had no knowledge of any dealings with Alex's firm, and invoices were concocted to justify millions in payments. Even internal reports had been manipulated to portray revenue that never existed. Every document, every transaction, every carefully staged success was now a piece of evidence in a legal case that would ultimately bring him down. Employees who had worked alongside Alex were shocked to learn the truth. Many had believed in the legitimacy of the company, taking pride in their work and assuming their contributions were helping build a genuine enterprise. They were now forced to confront the fact that their labor had supported nothing more than an elaborate facade. Some were angry, some were humiliated, and some were quietly relieved that they had not been implicated directly in the criminal activity. For Alex, this was another blow. He had carefully cultivated loyalty, and now it had crumbled alongside his reputation. The financial unraveling revealed the scale of the deception. Millions of pounds had been moved through offshore accounts, shell company, and elaborate financial maneuvers designed to conceal the true source and destination of funds. Luxury properties, high-end vehicles, and investments that had seemed like legitimate business ventures were now clearly funded with stolen investor money. The illusion of a thriving empire had been so convincing that it had gone undetected for years, and yet it had all been built on a foundation of lies so delicate that one small human error, a mismatched serial number on a laptop, had exposed everything. Alex attempted to salvage his situation, presenting carefully worded statements claiming innocence and blaming employees for supposed mistakes. He sought to cast doubt on the evidence, arguing that discrepancies were minor and unintentional. But by this point, the weight of proof was overwhelming. Investigators had an airtight case, built on documents, emails, financial records, and the testimony of employees who had been involved unknowingly. The elaborate structure Alex had built for self-protection had no defense against the combined force of scrutiny and evidence. The public spectacle intensified as the news spread. Alex, once celebrated as a visionary, became a cautionary tale. His name was splashed across newspapers, television segments, and social media, each report emphasizing the audacity and scale of the deception. Analysts dissected the financial schemes for viewers, turning what had once been an inaccessible web of fraud into a story everyone could understand. The empire that had seemed glamorous and untouchable was now a lesson in greed, arrogance, and the vulnerability of perfection. In the final stages of the investigation, it became apparent that the empire had operated for nearly a decade without delivering a single legitimate product to a genuine client. Every milestone celebrated publicly, the product launches, the press features, the supposedly successful contracts was carefully orchestrated theater. The realization shocked investors, employees, and the public alike. Alex's genius had not been in innovation as many had believed, but in deception. Yet that genius could not withstand the fragility of human error. By the time the authorities moved to formally charge Alex, the collapse was complete. The empire he had spent years constructing, worth an alleged £26 million, had been dismantled piece by piece. Bank accounts were seized, properties confiscated, and employees cleared of wrongdoing while cooperating with the prosecution. Alex, once untouchable and admired, was left exposed, vulnerable, and facing the consequences of a decade of lies. The story of his fall would go down in history as a dramatic example of how even the most elaborate deceptions can be undone by a single mistake, and how no empire built on lies, no matter how vast, can withstand the truth forever. The aftermath of Alex Radcliffe's downfall was as public as it was devastating. Within weeks of the investigation, news outlets had chronicled every detail of the £26 million deception. Investors, once enamored by promises of innovation and rapid growth, scrambled to recover what they could. Employees who had spent years believing in the company's mission were left grappling with feelings of betrayal and disbelief. The empire that had seemed untouchable was now a cautionary tale for the business world, a stark reminder that even the most polished illusions can collapse under the weight of truth. Alex himself became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked ambition and meticulous deceit. For years he had mastered the art of perception, convincing the public, employees and investors that his empire was legitimate and thriving. But all it took was one small overlooked error to ignite a chain reaction that revealed the truth. A mismatched serial number on a single laptop, a detail that seemed insignificant, had exposed a network of lies so extensive that it had taken years to construct. The irony was impossible to ignore. The empire that had appeared so flawless could be undone by something so ordinary, so human. Legal proceedings moved swiftly. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence showing how Alex had orchestrated fake contracts, fabricated clients, and moved millions through offshore accounts to fund luxury purchases and personal investments. Witnesses, including employees who had unknowingly been part of the scheme, testified about the meticulous attention Alex had paid to maintaining appearances. Every lavish party, every glossy product launch, and every staged success had been part of a larger performance designed to mask the absence of real business activity. As the case unfolded, the media chronicled each revelation with relentless attention. Headlines detailed every fraudulent transaction. Headlines detailed every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, and every luxury acquisition funded by investor money. Public fascination grew, with audiences captivated by the sheer audacity of the deception. Commentators dissected Alex's methods, analyzing how he had maintained the illusion for so long, and how a single error had triggered the empire's collapse. The narrative was compelling, not only because of the scale of the fraud, but because it highlighted a fundamental truth. No system of deceit, no matter how intricate, is immune to the smallest imperfection. The emotional toll on those involved was immense. Employees wrestled with the knowledge that their work, which they had assumed contributed to legitimate business operations, had supported a massive fraud. Investors faced financial losses and the humiliation of having been deceived. Even Alex's inner circle, who had trusted his leadership, were left stunned by the revelations. The empire that had seemed secure, admired, and powerful was now reduced to headlines, court documents, and confiscated assets. Yet, amid the devastation, lessons emerged. The collapse of Alex Radcliffe's empire served as a stark warning about the dangers of unchecked trust and the importance of scrutiny in both business and personal dealings. It showed how charisma and appearances could be used to manipulate perception, masking serious wrongdoing. More importantly, it demonstrated that even the most carefully constructed systems can be undone by human error, reminding the world that perfection is always fragile. Emma Lawson, the junior accountant, whose attention to detail had uncovered the first discrepancy, became an unexpected hero. Her diligence illustrated how ordinary vigilance could disrupt the most sophisticated schemes, proving that one person's careful observation could tip the balance between concealment and exposure.